Greetings everyone. Before this film actually starts, I'd like to apologise for some of the cutlery noises during Mike's talk. That was sadly unavoidable. Also, as fate would have it, our sound director of the day for this particular evening came down with COVID, so we were left to our own devices. So I apologise for the lighting and that the annoying noise of people eating their sweets with cutlery on the dishes. But Mike Breen was competition director of Leyland Australia in the 70s. He has a brief history when Gordon is giving the prologue prior. Mike looked after the Pro Series, which was an event to promote the TR7, and also the V8 that they converted from a 4-cylinder to a V8 to compete in the Southern Cross Rally, but Leyland Australia pretty much fell over before that all happened. Gladly, that car is now Ian Cowie's, which is that silver and blue one that you'll see occasionally in some of my videos. I hope you enjoy this, and I'll try to cut out some of Mike's talk about Toyota and just leave it as the Triumph stuff. He had a long and varied career in the Australian motor history. Thank you.
Gordon onions and ask him to come up and give us some entertainment. Lights, camera, action.
Thanks very much, Father. Yeah, without you I wouldn't survive. So whenever I hear moderator, I always think of my Presbyterian background, because the moderator is the head of the church, but I haven't been in one of those for a while. What happened to
Whatever you like.
So Ian has left us in the lurch. He's broken down. So sadly Ian has there's a touch of COVID, so he's not going to be able to be here this evening. But he's done a fantastic job in organising this. You have to give him credit for, first of all, getting Mike to come along and speak with us. And I know some of you are saying, who the hell's Mike Breen? Anyway, I'll tell you in a minute. And he also did a lot of work to make sure that everybody knew about it and made appearances here tonight. So I think we all should give Ian a round of applause. The worst thing about it, however, Mike, is that Ian dumped me in this seat and said, well, you know Mike, so you can ask the questions. So Mike's asked us to do this rather than by lecture, as a sort of a question and answer approach, and linking it with some great slides that will follow. So let me say a little bit about Mike, so this mystery man, and Liz, sorry, I should introduce Liz as well, because she's as shy as Mike is. But thank you both for being here. Liz is a Melbourneite, isn't she? She is. Yeah, that's right. How do you bear being in Sydney? I had to come back. So Ian asked me to do this only because Mike and I worked together for about 25 years at Toyota. So Mike was there well ahead of me. But the more interesting thing is that Mike also worked for Leyland. And that's where the story linked to Ian's famous TR7 comes about. So let me just say a little bit about some background, just so you get a bit of a feel for who Mike is. Liz has confirmed one of the things I always wondered about Mike. He's actually quite shy. He's tended to avoid the limelight, even though he was responsible and in a very significant way for the success of Toyota's PR and press relations for a very long time. So I think most of you will know that Toyota's known by a lot of people, and Mike had a major part to play in continuing to support and if you like, promote the brand. So anybody who wants to admit to driving a Toyota can understand that there's some thanks to be given here. So I met Mike when I first arrived because I don't know, we had some legal issue that he caused and I had to solve for him. But the other thing we found out was that we both liked cars, and I have to admit, in those days there weren't that many people in Toyota who really liked cars. And we also understood that we liked motorsport. And I must say I really developed my friendship with Mike to ensure that I got close to all of the racing and rallying activity as well. And Mike's helped in that regard too. You know, you've seen if any of you have been to the circuit and seen me in my race suit, it's Neil Bates's race suit, and I got it because Mike helped put in a good word for me with Neil and Coral Taylor, so thanks for that too, Mike. So the other interesting thing from a Triumph point of view is that I, as you know, have a Dolomite Sprint, and I had it in Sydney at the headquarters at Woolooware Bay, and I needed somewhere to park it, and Mike put in a good word for me to allow it to be parked where the cars were prepared for the press fleet. And as it turned out, one day I said, would one of you blokes mind giving it a bit of a wash? It was pretty grubby. And Mike's nephew also worked there, and he was driving a Dolomite Sprint as well. So when the car came back, it was the best it ever looked. He really put some work into it. And as it turned out, the car that Matty drove at that time was the car that Mike pinched from, bought from the Leyland press fleet when the Sprint was first released. And I'm sure Mike, if you want to know, will tell you a story about that as well. So we've had some pretty good experiences. Mike also helped me put the Spitfire somewhere. Now I could justify the Spitfire being parked at Toyota because at least the Spitfire was made or assembled at AMI Toyota at the old Port Melbourne plant where I used to work. So let's talk about Mike. So a PR guru, really, recognised in the industry as one of the very, very fine PR people. But a real lover of cars, including Triumphs, and he's owned one. He's owned one, two, I beg your pardon. Sadly, he now admits to owning an MG midget, but we won't hold that against him. So Mike started his career in 1971 as an apprentice fitter and turner at British Leyland in Sydney.
Leyland Australia.
It was British Leyland.
It was British Leyland in those days, wasn't it?
Was it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. It became British Leyland a little later and then closed down.
Ah.
Yeah. It was PMC, British Leyland, Leyland Australia, then it closed.
Yes.
Sorry, Mike.
Sorry.
So he finished his apprenticeship in the marketing department 4 years later, and that really kicked off the career I've just described. And he's been through, you know, the high points and the low points of both the industry and motorsport, and has had a strong relationship with the motorsport arms of both companies. And Toyota is secondary here. The most important thing for us to talk about this evening is that connection with Leyland, British Leyland and Leyland Australia's motorsport, and in particular Ian's TR7 V8. And there's a fantastic story linked to Ian's car, and as you can imagine, Ian was very interested to have that told. He says he would be the first to admit that many marketing and PR successes started with what seemed to be a good idea at the time, but along the way there were plenty of near misses, so good luck and many prayers. Thank God for moderators here. However, it's the recovery that counts, and I can also vouch for that fact as well. So tonight we want to spend some time looking at the TR7 story. Mike, I think you'll be happy to take questions other than from people like me. I hope, yeah. So let's make a start. So what I should have done was actually get the device that moves the slides along, and I'll give it to you, Mike, so you can move it to the next one, if it works.
If I just explain a bit about that photograph, which I was asked. I'm standing in a truck at a service park in 2008 at one of the rallies in Australia, and someone, unbeknownst to me, took that photograph. So I was standing there looking at the rally cars thinking, what the hell do we do now? Because there's always a problem. And so that's the explanation of that photograph with the door of the truck with that sticker on it, with the ARC 2009.
No, I've got a bit of a
Come on, try at the moment.
Yes.
We failed to proceed.
Yeah, it won't start. All right.
Does anybody know any jokes?
It's a locust system.
Prince of Darkness.
Well, I'm sorry.
You've got something you prepared earlier?
Yeah.
Too far.
Thank you for that.
That's a good sign.
That's the one.
That's the one. Yeah, good sign. So I should explain how I come to be sitting here. About 2 years ago, Bruce called me, and I'd never met Bruce before in my life, or knew. Ian, sorry, I've got the wrong Bruce.
Still don't know.
Ian called me. That was another Bruce. He called me and he said, I've just bought a TR7. I said, yeah. He said, I understand that you may have had something to do with it. And I said, maybe. And I said, so which TR7 is it? So it was a fully works-prepared car from the UK, and you brought it into Australia and you ran it in the Australian Rally Championship. I said, well, yes, we did have a TR7 that we ran in the ARC, but we only ran it in one event, and that was the Southern Cross Rally. So how we came to do that was in the late 70s, we had a lot of TR7s that we couldn't give away. Nobody wanted to buy them. And so the marketing manager called me into his office and said, we've got a problem with TR7. I said, yeah, right. He said, we've been given a budget by British Leyland in the UK to turbocharge every TR7 that we've got left in stock, sitting at grass. I said, right. And he said, with that, we've got a budget to do a rally program with a turbocharged TR7. I said, okay, where are we getting the car from? He said, that's not my problem, that's your problem. Okay. I said, what's the budget? He said, don't worry about that. He said, you just make it happen. I said, okay, so I've got to prepare a rally car with a turbocharged engine for the Australian Rally Championship. Yep, off you go. So I went out, spoke to Garrett, who were going to do all these turbocharged TR7s for us, and asked how we could go about turbocharging this engine. And they said, oh, we can't do that for you. There's a guy in Melbourne called Wayne Mencken who turbocharges engines. He raced an EH Holden with a turbocharged engine. So I rang Wayne and asked him how to do this. And he said, oh, just give me the car and I'll turbocharge it for you. So I had to find a TR7 that we didn't want. And I rang the sales guys and I said, we've got any TR7s we don't want or don't need. And he said, oh, we've got sheds full of them. I said, no, I only just want one. And so he said, yeah, we've got one in the big shed in Melbourne where we prepare all the cars to go out to the dealers. And I said, oh, he said, we've been using it for spare parts. And I said, okay, I'll take that one. And so I had it shipped from the warehouse over to Wayne, and Wayne proceeded to turbocharge the engine. And about 2-3 weeks later, I called and I said, how are you going? He said, yep, we're all finished, ready to go. I said, okay, I'll fly down and have a look at it, take it for a drive. So I flew down and I took a trade plate with me. And he didn't have any trade plate, so he couldn't road test the car. So I'd been sitting in the shed and he'd done it up, but he hadn't driven it. So he took it out and drove it up and down the street in front of his workshop, and it went and seemed to go okay. And so I said, I'll drive it back to Sydney. And so I jumped in the car and hung the trade plate off the back and off I drove to Sydney. But it was missing quite a few bits, mainly the front spoiler. And the difference the front spoiler makes at 130, 140 kilometres an hour is amazing. And within the length of a semi-trailer, if you're overtaking, this is 1979, so there was no freeway. The car would start to wander all over the road, just overtaking the semi-trailer. And so I worked out how to operate this turbocharged TR7. And it went fine, got all the way up through Albury, all the way through into Goulburn. Just north of Goulburn, the throttle just nothing. It was just, the throttle pedal was just going up and down. So I pulled at the side of the road in at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I popped the bonnet, and all I had was the glow of the turbo to see what was going on. And I kind of could see that the little through, I think they call them, that holds the throttle cable in had come out, and so the cable was just going backwards and forwards on the spring. And so I pulled the one off the choke, which I figured I didn't need anymore, pushed it on with my thumb onto the throttle, and as I was pushing it, I brought my knuckle back and onto the turbocharger and melted all the back of my knuckles. So I did a U-turn, I drove back to Goulburn and went into a service station there, and they had some tools. And so I managed to push the little rule on properly and put a bit of gaffer tape on just for sure, and turned around and drove back to Sydney. And I pushed the rest of my hand on top of the gear change because it was in front of the air vents. I just had the cold air going over the top of my hand to try and keep it cool. So I got it home, took it into work the next day and showed the boss, you know, we've got this turbocharged TR7, goes like hell. We went for a drive in it, and then we killed him. And then what do we do now? Okay, so we need to enter it in the Southern Cross Rally, which was one of the biggest rallies around. So I got onto a guy by the name of Bill Nolan, who worked in our advertising agency, and he had some motorsport experience. And I said, okay, we need to build this car and we need some people, and so he had a few contacts. And one of his contacts was Colin Bond. And Colin was very keen to have Leyland come into the Australian Rally Championship because Nissan had just pulled out and he was running the Ford Works team, the Escorts. And so he was keen to help us. And so he told us where to go and get it all prepared. So we went and had it prepared. We went on the Southern Cross Rally and the plug leads all melted and the car stopped in the middle of the rally. So we dragged the car back to Sydney. I went to see my boss and I said, this ain't going to work. It's going to cost us a fortune to prepare the car and develop it and make it competitive with the Escorts. I said, even though Colin's really keen to help us, we're not going to get there. So we went through the whole process and we thought, we'd put a V8 engine in it and just see what difference that would make. And we could still get the money from the UK. So we went to Colin's friend who built the first BDA Escorts for him, Brian Hope. And I asked him, could he put the V8 engine in it? He said, yep. And so I phoned the engineering department and I said, have you got any spare V8 engines you don't want? And they said, yeah, we've got a shed load of them. So I went and grabbed a 3500cc Rover engine and SD1 Rover engine and sent it over to Brian, and Brian engineered the engine into the car. Wonderful job. And then we sat down and tried to work out what it was going to cost, the logistics, who was going to drive it. And so he thought Ross Duncan, because he was now free of the Nissan team, he could drive it. And the budget was going to be around $40,000 for one championship for about 5 rallies. And we thought $40,000, what are we going to get as a return on that investment? Because nobody knew anything about rallying in Australia unless you promoted it yourself. And so we finally decided that rallying wasn't the way to go. Like, nobody knew about it. It was going to cost too much. So I had a chat with Bill Nolan, our rally driver, and he came to a meeting we held with an Autosport magazine. And in it was a story of a series that had just begun in Europe with the BMW M1, where there was a Pro-Am, and Formula One drivers and amateurs would drive in the same races together around the various Formula One circuits. And he said, what about that for an idea? And I said, that sounds like a good idea. And the sales director was there as well. And he said, yep, we should do that. Let's do that. So with that, we thought, now how the hell are we going to do that? And again, it was my problem. So I got on to Emery Park Raceway, who ran a thing called the M-Star Series. They ran 5 races over 5 tracks. And so we went to see Emery Park. Ivan Stibbard was the general manager, and he thought this was a good idea. We then went to Channel 7, and they were very keen to have the TR7 series on Channel 7, and we thought we'd get 7 pro drivers, as you would. And so Channel 7 were very keen to make this happen. And so we got on the phone, we got on to Jim Richards and Jack Brabham and
Next slide. Oh, next slide.
yes.
Just before you go off that slide, which is, do you want to go back? Which is the car you were talking about? Is it the one here or
It's
is it
that
the one
one
up
there,
the top
UFO
there?
005.
Where the stag's just about to pass it. The stag's just about to lap his own.
That's on the Southern Cross Rally.
That one there.
The one on the left, UFO 005.
And that's Ian's car.
And then, to progress from there, when we stopped rallying the car, it was just sitting in the shed gathering dust. And a guy came to us and said, his name is Milton Leslie, he said, I want to enter it in the sports car championship. And we said, sure, no problem. So I gave him the car. I think he paid a few bucks for it. And he changed it from that to look like that down there.
Oh yeah.
With the DD on the bonnet.
Yep.
And he put it in that show up there. And then, I'm not sure what happened to it after that, but I think Michael knows the story. It went to Adelaide eventually.
Yeah, something like, it disappeared. And then Leyland Australia fell over.
Yeah, so it sat in that shed in Adelaide for a long time, and then Ian found it. And
Serendipity.
And that's when he got onto me, because he somehow found out the history of it and called me and said...
So it was actually like the silver one.
So now we've had a chance to have a look at Keith's car at Southern Loop rather than Southern Cross Rally. So this is...
I'll go back.
Oh, we've got 1, 2... So it's working now, is it?
Yeah.
You just sat on it.
Okay.
So we decided we needed 7 pro drivers. So we got Bob Morris, Jim Richards, Kevin Bartlett, Colin Bond, Pete Gagan, Jack Brabham, Gary Siegel, John Harvey, John Cox. And of course, Jack was overseas most of the time and he wasn't around, so we had to bring in other drivers. So we ultimately ended up with 7 pro drivers, and we had to get the cars prepared in just a couple of months. So the guy that was running the cars for us was a fellow named Ron Dillard. And I said, are we going to blueprint and balance all the engines? And he said, we don't have time. I said, so what are we going to do? And he said, best thing to do is drive them for 1,000k there and 1,000k back. I said, okay. So we got 7 of my mates and their wives, and we jumped in the cars on Saturday morning. We drove to Broken Hill, spent the night at Broken Hill, and we turned around and we drove back to Sydney, and that ran the cars in. And so the cars ran the whole series with just bog stock standard engines, and never missed a beat. The only problem we had with one was one of the drivers, who I won't name, went over Pitcher Pave Hill, which was like 160k at the top of Emery Park. And he changed from 4th gear down to 1st as he went out. And he came, this was in practice, and he came around and I could hear the bang, 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 bang. So that was the end of the car, that engine. And so we had 2 spare cars, we had 9 cars in total. And so we just replaced that one with that one. And that was the only engine failure we had, and that was through going from 4th to 1st. But other than that, no, bog stock standard TR7s.
And that technique of driving them 1,000 kilometres with your banks to run them in was then used forever, wasn't it, as a preparation for the rest of it?
So we ran the TR7 series for 2 years. It was designed to go on for longer, but the idea was the V8 TR7 was going to come in mid to late 1981, and then we're going to run the series from the 4-cylinder engine and run it as a V8 series. But we found out halfway through 1981 that Leyland had decided not to continue production of the TR7. So TR7 production ceased by the end of 1981. And during the second season, we had a couple of crashes. One was Pete Gagan in a practice session. He rolled the car over a couple of times. And then a bit later on, Dick Johnson in another race. He was running a few rounds and he got a little out of control and he rolled the car several times. So we had two TR7s that were a bit second-hand. And Colin Bond, Ford did pull out of the Australian Rally Championship, so Colin was looking for something to do. And he said, how about I run a TR7 V8 rally car? And I said, we've tried that. You're more than welcome to have a go yourself. And so Colin bought the Pete Gagan car and the Dick Johnson car and made it into one rally car. And all the race cars had PRO number plates, Pro 7. And so Colin built this rally car, and I think that's me in the top left corner with the beard. And we took it to Gosford and ran in the 2GO rally. And it had basically it's a BD8 Escort underneath with a P76 engine. And he ran in the 2GO rally in Gosford in 1982 or 83. And then he thought he'd had enough of that, and so he sold it on. And that was the next one was another shot of the rally car.
And that was the end of Leyland in rallying in Australia?
Correct. That's right.
And why? No interest with the company and what? Too much money?
Well, Leyland Australia was kind of coming to the end of this. So at the end of 1981, I left Leyland, and when we ran the TR7 series, Goodyear was kind enough to supply the tyres for a charge. And Barclays Bank were the sponsors of the series. And that came about by a casual conversation between the managing director of Leyland Australia and his next door neighbour, who was the managing director of Barclays Bank. And Barclays Bank were about to go into car finance, and they were looking for something to promote the car finance. And the Barclays guy said to the MD of Leyland, Phil Lavelle, have you got any thoughts on how we can promote Barclays Bank? He said, well, as a matter of fact, we've got this racing series. And so on the Monday morning, we went in to see Barclays Bank. We explained over the boardroom table, with no paperwork or anything, what we're going to do. And they said, how much do you need? And we said, $40,000, because that was what we budgeted. And they said, okay, just hang on a second, we'll get you a bank check. And I'm sitting there with Bill Nolan, the guy from our agency, and we sat and had a cup of tea and a biscuit and whatever, and 20 minutes later they came back and there was a bank check made out to Leyland Australia for $40,000. And that covered 1 year, and they gave us another $40,000 for the next year. So it's great to have a bank sponsor. No questions asked. And there were no demands, they never asked for anything. They just gave us the money.
And do you think they felt they got their money's worth out of it?
I don't know.
And this V8 was a P76 V8. And what happened to it after Colin finished rallying?
He sold it on, and somebody else rallied it for some time, and I think it's still with him.
He sold it to Bob Banford, who raced it and rolled it and totaled it.
Oh, right.
He's currently on Facebook, he's got another shell.
Yeah.
The only thing he kept from that car was the instrument gauge. So he's got the the instrument panel is going to go back in,
Yeah.
and he's got the Pro 706 number plate. So those are the only two things. And he'd got another shell and he was going to put it back together, and he decided not to. And the whole lot was sold to a guy back in the UK.
Oh, right.
And that's lost the thread there.
Yeah.
But there wasn't much of it left. It was very badly crashed.
Yeah. Being a short wheelbase, they were very difficult to keep in a straight line.
Yeah.
Yes, you could ask for the TR7 races.
Best thing to do is extend the wheelbase. So, when we finished, when we decided not to continue with the turbocharged rally car, we had the turbocharged engine sitting on the workshop floor, and I said to one of the engineering guys, why don't we put it into a press car? And he said, yeah, okay. And so that car was blue, and it was a press car. And so we had it painted black, put the turbocharged engine in, which was water cooled, and then had a big water bottle in the boot to keep it cool in the engine. So we had the water bottle in the boot, so you had to remember to put water in it. And we put some big wheels on it, like we put the number plates on that car. And that was my company car for a couple of years, which was quite... One day, we're out at Amaroo, and Jim Richards was out at the track, and he saw the car and he said, what's in that? And I said, turbocharged. He said, oh, do you mind if I drive it back to the place where I'm staying? I said, no problem. So I jumped in the passenger seat. I learned never to sit in the passenger seat with a race car driver on a public road. Jim,
I'll just ask if anybody would like to ask a question. Yeah, go.
Hi, Stu Smith. I've got a TR7 convertible, so that's my focus. And there was one sold recently in Melbourne that claimed to be an import of an Australian spec TR7, and it looked like it had all the right features. About 1990, after I bought my car, which was a California one, a guy in the block of flats where I was living said, hey, I used to work at British Leyland in Sydney, and did you know there was a right-hand drive convertible TR8 brought into Australia? So he seemed to know enough that the story was genuine. So can I ask the question, did the TR7 ever get ADR compliance as an Australian car and the convertible, and the TR8 right-hand drive convertible get here as a certification car?
the TR7 convertible is a white car. And we used to get the pre-production cars registered in the ACT because it was much, much easier to get a car, an uncomplianced car registered in ACT. In Sydney it was a nightmare, and Melbourne. And so I used to drive the pre-production cars down to Melbourne, down to ACT, got to know the guy at the ACT Rego place really well. And the TR7 arrived from the UK because we were going to launch the TR7 convertible and the V8, and you know, they were all in the plan. And so I drove that TR7 down to Canberra really early one morning, and it set on 165 kilometres an hour all the way along Lake George with the roof down. It was a great little car to drive, and got it registered, and I drove it back with ACT plates, and then that was it. The whole program died because TR7 production ceased. So that car doesn't. I saw it advertised in a magazine, and that was the car that I drove down to Canberra.
So that's the only one?
Yeah.
So
But there was no TR7 V8. They did a lot of work towards it, but there was never a TR7 V8 production car. Yeah.
And there was no compliance plate approval.
No. That, because it was registered in ACT, it didn't have to have a compliance plate. Because you had to sign a stat dec to say that it wouldn't be on sold, like Leyland could use it for marketing and engineering purposes, but it couldn't be sold. And so that was it. It didn't have a compliance plate.
Thank you very much.
Barry?
It's not really a question, but I suppose you're going to tell us you got paid for doing all of that.
As a matter of fact, I did. Not much, but I did.
David?
Mike, was the TR8 engineering based on the TR7 V8 that you talked about here, or was it originally designed right from the start to be able to take the V8 engine?
It was designed to take the V8 engine right from the beginning, and the Australian sales and marketing and engineering guys thought that we were supposed to launch the car here in 1977, and there were delays and delays and delays, and we got a lot of hate mail from people who were upset. And time went by, and so they decided that to reduce parts complexity and engineering complexity and service training, that we basically take the 4-cylinder TR7 but with all the V8 running gear. So transmission, prop shaft, diff, axles, brakes, were all designed for a V8. So that when the V8 arrived, instead of the parts guys having to sort out 4-cylinder TR7, and because the 4-cylinder TR7 was basically a 2-litre Dolomite engine, a sprint engine with the standard Dolomite cylinder head. So the whole car was designed to have the V8 engine in it right from the very beginning. And so the 4-cylinder TR7s we sold here were vastly over-engineered for a 4-cylinder engine.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike, Rob Boyd, fabulous presentation. Best bunch of stories I've heard in a long time. You seem to be uniquely positioned to sort of answer a question along the lines of the race on Monday, sell on Monday sort of concept. Does it actually make sense?
It did. I'm not sure it does today. But when we decided to do the TR7 series, we had a lot of TR7s that we just could not sell. You know, there'd been the TR6 prior to it, which was a fabulous sports car. And then we had this TR7, which was a Dolomite with 2 doors. And we took all the advertising promotion budget and put it into the TR7 series. You know, we stopped cinema advertising that we were using and print advertising. And all the money from that went into the TR7 series. And within the year that we ran the first year of the TR7 series, we sold out TR7s. So the second year, when I had to go and get 7 more TR7s for the next year, I went to the sales guys and I said, I need some cars for the series. And they said, bugger off, we haven't got enough to sell. I said, well, I need 7 cars. And they said, well, you can't have them. So I found 7 TR7s in the yard, and I had to put on a truck and taken to the workshop, and the engines pulled out on the weekend, so that by the Monday the sales guys couldn't get them back. And so we ran the second year. So if you say race on Sunday, sell on Monday, the TR7 series was an perfect example of being able to sell cars as a result of car racing. So, and that was all through Channel 7, TR7 series, Emery Park, racing car drivers that people knew. So, and the word just spread. And we got, one of the important things we thought about early on was that we needed advocates for the car, and we didn't have any. So we thought the best place to go was the TSOA in Sydney. And a guy by the name of Roger Gates was the president of the TSOA in Sydney. And we said, we need you guys to come and give us a hand. Come out on the weekend, help out, prepare the cars, look after the race car drivers. You know, you can look after Jim Richards, you can look after Colin Bond. And they jumped at the idea. And so they all came out and they helped out every weekend. You know, they put the tent up and they helped with catering and everything. And so the tribe guys got really active in the TR7 series. So much so that a couple of Roger bought one of the cars from the first year and he raced it in the series the second year. So the TSOA being involved was critical to the success. And we also decided that we needed to take the car to a track and show it off to club members around. So we entered TSOA lap dashes at Catalina Park, Oran Park, Amaroo. and I just happened to drive it.
Oh.
And so I just turned
That's
up,
surprising.
stick a crash helmet on, and I do the lap dashes at Catalina and Oran Park, and people watched it go around. I'm just a punter, I'm not a race car driver, and did pretty decent times, and so that again was part of the process of selling the car to enthusiasts.
So Roger, it sounds a bit like the forerunner to the Spitfire project. That's
We're a bit light on for fun.
I can add to that a little, that TSOA Victoria also had a hand in promoting the sales. At the first national meeting that we had in New South Wales, there was a loan car, and I thought, well, if TSOA New South Wales can get a loan car, why can't we?
Yeah.
So at the motor show here in Melbourne, I went up to the Leyland stand and I spoke to a chap called Owen Peake.
It was his birthday yesterday.
Oh, was it really? I got very friendly with him.
Yeah.
To a degree.
Owen's a lovely bloke.
And they were gracious enough to lend us cars for various events. And one was, we had a run called the Friends of the Zoo, and a couple of the famous people from Cop Shop came, and we escorted them in all their cars, plus some of these loan cars. But the one memorable one was we were contacted by a record company, I think it was EMI, wanting to know if we could provide cars and drivers to promote a Michael Jackson 5 record that was being released. And so off I went to Owen, and we got some cars, and the record that was being released was Triumph.
Wow.
Jackson 5. So TSOA Vic also had a bit of a hand.
Oh, good. I'm pleased.
You mentioned before that you sold all the pro cars, the showroom cars that were going out to the public. The figure that I've heard bandied around is that there were roughly 200 cars sold as a result of the 2 years of the Pro Car Series. Is that roughly right?
Could be. I didn't work in the sales department. I didn't care, as long as we got rid of the cars.
So all the showroom cars were treated to gold paint down the side, a Pro decal, and a set of 5 Australian-made gold performance mags.
Yeah.
Now those 200 cars would come from the factory in England with the original alloys. So you had 1,000 original alloy wheels. What happened to those?
Where are they? The gold stripe and the wheels were the idea of the marketing guys. The engineering guys said all we can do without having to do ADR the car was paint and wheels.
Yeah.
And even the wheels were a bit of a stretch. We couldn't do anything else. So the marketing guys come up with the TR7 Pro. This is after we created the series. And so all the rims came off, and I think there's a guy in Sydney called David Smith, and he owned a company called Mini Kingdom. And just about anything surplus to requirement he bought and sold through his Mini Kingdom place at Reevesby. Okay. So I'd say that's where they went. I didn't look into any of that. Yeah. They just happened.
And in 1980 you had 7 drivers, and they all had TR7 Pro number plates. There's a couple that are missing in the sequence when you look through all the magazines and the photos, TR08 being one of them. And I stumbled across one press photo of that car. So you answered this question earlier saying that there were 7 race cars and Ron Gillard had at least 2 spare cars.
Yeah. That's
correct. So in the first year there were 9 cars prepared with roll cages and cutout switches and fuel tank, foam cell and all the rest of it.
Correct.
Those cars were flogged and they all survived.
Yep.
And then were they sold to the Pro-Am drivers the next year, and you got a fresh batch of new cars for 81?
Yeah, so in 1980 we had the 9 race cars.
Yep.
Well, we also gave each of the pro drivers a road car to drive around. And we had a little brass plaque made you know, saying Bob Morris, TR7, da da da, and we had pro number plates on all those cars too.
Yep.
So at the end of that year, the first year, we sold all those cars. The Bob Morris one became a prize for the Village Grand Prix.
Yep.
Gary Walden won the car, and then he decided to race it in the TR7 series. And a little funny story there. We're out at Amaroo early in 1981 doing suspension tuning, and this guy turned up in this TR7. And Ron Gillard and I are sitting under the Ron Hodson Media Centre, and this guy drove down on to the dummy grid, through the dummy grid, onto the pit lane, and went out onto the track the wrong way, and went around the wrong way. And I walked out, and I waved him down, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, I won this car in the Village Grand Prix," and he said, "I'm going to enter it in the series, and I've just come out to Amaroo to see what it's like." I said, "Well, you're going the wrong way." And he said, "Oh, I didn't know which way the track went." And I said, "Well, didn't you sign in up at the office and, you know, show them your CAM's licence?" He said, "Oh, I don't have a licence." And he said, "I didn't know you had to stop." And so Gary was doing laps the wrong way around Amaroo, and we said, "Come in and we'll tell you a few things." And so Gary came in, and Gary was a flower grower in YE near Gosford, and he sold a lot of flowers and made a lot of money. And so he said, "Ron, well, why don't you just prepare the car for me and I'll just turn up and drive it?" And Ron said, "Fine, give me the money and I'll do it." And so Gary gave Ron the car, and Gary just turned up on weekends and raced the car around, and then went back to Ron's workshop.
Yeah. So in 81, there were, my understanding was that there were only 5 pro drivers for that year.
Yep.
And a couple of spare cars again.
Yep.
And there was one of the amateur drivers was a female.
Yep.
I don't know if she was a member of TSOA or not, but on the first practice run, she crashed that car into a barrier or something, and it was undrivable. And either yourself or someone else that was there grabbed a press car, put some numbers on it and said, "Go out and drive that."
I think we gave her one of the spare cars.
Yeah.
The first year, because we had 7 drivers the first year, because we didn't have time to promote the series to get pro drivers, to get amateur drivers, and so we thought we'll get 7 pros, and pro drivers are showmen. You know, they put on a show. They don't race, they put on a show, and they were just incredible. Those Bob Morrison, Colin Bond, Jim Richards, Jack Brabham, Gossie, all those guys, they just put on the most amazing show. They were literally banging doors without damaging the cars. And the only panels we ever really had was the nose got dented, because when they brake, they go underneath the back of the car in front, and we had the spare wheel well kept getting punched in. So the first race we left the spare wheels in, we couldn't get the damn things out because they were all banged in. So we decided to take the spare wheels out for the next race. But we gave Carol, she was an air hostess.
Yeah.
Her husband didn't like the idea of her racing, but she just fell in love with car racing, and so she came along. And so the second year, when we had time to promote it and what have you, we figured we're going to have all these amateurs racing, so we don't need 7 pro drivers, so we just dropped it back to 5.
And Gay and Dick Smith rolled...
Dick Johnson, yeah.
Dick Johnson, sorry, rolled 2 cars halfway through that season, so the spare cars obviously came in.
Yep.
And those wrecks, one of those was 706, which went to the rally car. That's how when he bought the wreck, he had got the number plate with it.
Yep.
And that number plate still exists today on a car that's been rebuilt, fashioned after the rally car.
Wow.
Yeah.
The funny thing with Pete Gavin, I don't know if you know, but he had a bit of a bad stutter.
Yeah.
And it was the qualifying, I think, on the Saturday, and he was coming through the loop at Amaroo, and he got a tank slapper up, and it was, I got it, and you could just see that part of the track from the pits. And he went sideways, and then flipped it onto its roof. And the only way he could get out was through the back window, because we just had a cage, like a roll bar in it. We didn't have a full cage.
What a small boy.
Anyway, somehow he climbed out through the back window, which had disappeared. And he just had a little cut on the back of his hand. That was the only injury in the whole 2 years of the series that anyone got hurt. Anyway, he came back to the pits. And he came up to me and he said, I'm sorry. I said, that's okay. He said, do you want me tomorrow? And I said, of course we do. And in the time it took for him to get back to the pits, we put his name Gagan on the windscreen of the spare car and his number on the door. And he almost had tears in his eyes. And he was a wonderful person and was an amazing driver.
So in that second year with the Pro-Am drivers, what was the largest grid that you had? 5 professionals and...
Yeah.
Because I've seen some photos where it looks like it's close to 20 cars.
Yeah, I think we got to 20.
Yeah.
Ultimately. Peter Hogwood drove in one of them. He was a sports car champion.
Yep.
So there was a lot of amateurs. What we wanted was amateurs to come and have a go. And so we got a lot of amateurs. And at the end of a race, all the pro drivers would get out and the amateurs would come over to where we had the cars lined up. And they'd all start to talk about what they'd done and what they did and how they did it and how wonderful it was. And Bondi and those guys just loved talking to people. And so they told them what to do and how to do this and try this. And then at the next race, the amateurs would come out. And on the Friday, Bondi and Bob Morris and those guys would turn up and the amateurs would follow them around the track to know the lines and gear change and turning and all that kind of stuff, brake.
Yeah.
So it was just a fantastic series.
You mentioned at the start of your speech that one of the drivers who I mentioned was Bob Morris, who was doing the clutchless changes.
Yes.
Ron Gillard didn't like that because part of his brief was to make sure these cars lasted the event and the whole year. And so on the Friday night, when they ballot out, because they changed the cars each time, so that it wouldn't be biased to someone who had a slightly faster car.
I did the ballot.
So Ron Gillard asked Bob Morris, would you please stop thrashing the gearboxes anyway? He wouldn't. So after the ballot on the Friday night, Gillard made sure he pulled the gearbox out and shoved it in whatever car Bob Morris got for that event. Yeah. And it still lasted, even though he thrashed it.
Well, immediately after each weekend, the cars will go back to Ron's work. They go to the panel beater first, then they go to Ron's workshop. And the first thing, you take Bob's gearbox out and put a new one in every race. Like you knew that was going to happen. But one of the things with the ballot was it was very fair and equitable. But certain drivers would complain that their car was slower than the other blokes. And so we had all the cars dynoed before we took them to the track. Barry Jones Automotive. Barry put them on his dyno, and every one, the slip would come out within 1 horsepower of each car. So they were all equal, horsepower-wise. And the driver would come in and say, my car's too slow, the air conditioning's not, they've got no air conditioning. Oh, okay. Like they come up with every excuse. So when the ballot happened, it would just so happen that the driver that had complained from the previous race would happen to get the car that won the previous race. And so when they still went up front, like that's the car that won the previous race, so we haven't done a thing to them. So that kind of tried to even it out a little bit.
So out of those roughly 15 cars, which were the pro cars, I know of 3 or 4 cars that still exist today. One that's fully restored and still raced in the Targa, not the Tasmanian one, the Cairns.
Yeah, Glasson. Michael Glasson.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's another car, one of the red ones, that's still owned somewhere in New South Wales. And about 18 months ago, a guy by the name of Smith, who is the world's biggest collector of TR7s, he's got about 20 of them. He found the brown car, which was in a pretty sorry state. He paid a lot of money for
That's
it.
one Dick rolled.
And he shipped that back to England, so that's sitting in a yard somewhere in England.
Wow.
And it's been on sold now, but it's part of its history is that they mentioned that the Pro Series, and it was Australian race car. And all the English guys are very impressed that Australia had a series because they didn't over there.
I think the English are probably surprised that we've got cars here sometimes.
Well, Steve Johnson drove for us in the 86 race series, and I was talking to him and he said, "You were involved with the TR7 series, weren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "My dad raced one and it rolled over." And I said, "Yeah, that's right." He said, "It was the brown one." And I said, "Yeah, it was." So Steve Johnson, all those years later, even knew the colour of the car that his dad had driven and rolled over.
Thank you for coming in.
No problem. Thank you.
Any other questions here?
I was curious about, with your PR and press work, had you done work prior to the TR7 series, or?
In motorsport, or?
Well, with not so much motorsport, but with promotion of, I'm particularly thinking of Spitfires, because once upon a time I worked with the Victorian Chamber of Manufacturers, and we had a lot of component producers who were members of the Chamber, and I have this sense in my mind of seeing a photograph of a Spitfire that was put up for the Miss Victoria.
Right.
And I have this photo in my mind, and I've looked through all my materials at home. I'm still not convinced I haven't found it and I haven't got it, but I still think there's a Spitfire that was put up for the Miss Victoria quest at some stage in the early 60s.
Yeah. Back in the day, BMC was just Austin and Morris, and then over the years they got MG and they got Wolseley and all these others. So Triumph was the standard Triumph company, and so it was separate from BMC, British Leyland, Leyland Australia. So in my time at Leyland, Triumph really didn't come under the umbrella. It wasn't until 1975 when we launched the Dolomite Sprint, and that was because local manufacturing shut down, and we needed to bring something in for the dealers to sell. And so the idea was to start to import the MGB again, the Spitfire, Midget, all these cars that have been discontinued, but that never happened. So the only cars we actually got was the Dolomite and Sprint, and the 2500 was built by AMI in Port Melbourne. And so we just kind of adopted those cars, but the Spitfire was never really part of our family of cars.
Michael?
Do you have any insight on when Leyland Australia brought in the Playboy TR7 from the United States?
Yes.
Apart from,
I think the plan was to bring the TR7 in 1977. And so in anticipation of that, we thought we needed a motorsport program, and my boss contacted Group 44, John Buffin, I think.
Bob Tullius.
Yeah, Bob Tullius.
Yeah.
And so Leyland Australia bought the Tullius TR7, and we bought it here, and the Playboy magazine, I think it just started here in Australia. And so through some kind of contract deal, Playboy became the sponsor of the car. And we got a fellow by the name of Bill Evans to drive it, Wild Bill Evans. And it was entered in the Sports Car Championship, but it didn't have enough power. So it just didn't complete. So, and then when we didn't bring the cars in when we thought we would, we just kind of shelved that program, and I don't even know what happened to the car. I know I kept the mini-light wheels off it.
Chris Swindler, a member of this club, he bought that car.
Oh yeah.
And he campaigned it for several years.
Right.
Well, he had it for that long, he didn't campaign it for all that. And he repainted it back into the white and green, original Group 44, and re-sold it back to the Americans for about $75,000. Yeah. Wow. They couldn't get enough of it.
There you go.
Stu, just make sure, has anybody else got a question? Yeah. Go, Stu.
I
back on the TR7 coming into Australia. So in British Leyland had a big strike in 77, Speak, and then they started up production, from what I can find in the books, and also Michael Edwards' book. They started up for a few months before they went across to Canley. So presumably they sort of cleaned up and used up the parts. It seems the Australian cars came from that batch in 78. It seems most of them have got serial numbers starting at 36,000. So the idea that we've just got back after a year's strike and they send you the batch of cars, and it's, I think I've seen, is there something like 1,500 cars in that batch? But is any stories around that, or any problems you can recall from that?
Well, one of those cars became the rally car. For the press launch, we decided we'd fly to Melbourne and pick up the press cars and drive them to Sydney for mileage accumulation. And so we flew down in the morning and we had all the cars registered down there. And as we were getting ready to leave, I noticed that all the cars had zone toughened windscreens, and they're all supposed to have laminated windscreens. And there are various other issues. Anyway, funny story. We all got on the road, we're heading towards Sydney, and just out along the Hume Highway, not far north of Albury, the stone hit the windshield of my car and it shattered. And so we pulled into a windscreen repair place, which don't repair windscreens, and they knocked all the glass out. And I bought a pair of goggles and a jacket and put a handkerchief across my face, and I drove the car all the way to Sydney with no windscreen. And I was picking the bugs out of thick teeth. The whole inside of the back window was covered in bugs, except for where my head was. So that was my experience with those first batch of TR7s. They weren't good cars.
And that's another first for you that Peter Brockpen copied at Bathurst some years later.
I don't think he copied.
So was it about what, 1,500, and that was like,
I don't know the number. I know the shed was full of them.
The batch, that batch endured for a year or two until the Pro Series sold in a hurry.
That's right. But by that stage we had gone through most of those first cars, and so the cars that came later were much better. Of course, there was Speak 1 and Speak 2 plants, and they closed Speak 1, and suddenly the productivity and the quality of Speak 2 just went like that. And so the next batches of cars that came from the Speak 2 plant were much, much better than the first batch of cars we got.
So there's also, it seems that the cars sat around so long that we now have Camry cars with the different logos. And
on the bonnet.
Yeah, so the decals had to be stripped off. And were some of the cars being repainted because they've been faded or...
the blues tended to fade more than the others. But there was just a TR7 sticker on the front, and so that had to be taken off, and the Triumph laurel wreath was replaced, put onto it.
And strangely, on some of the Aussie cars, they had compliance plates of 1980 attached to what were clearly the 78 cars.
Well, see, a compliance plate doesn't designate when the car was built. It only designates which ADR applied to that car when it was built. So you can have a compliance plate fitted right up on any car until the compliance number, the compliance changes. So like the Triumph Dolomite Sprint, just about all the Triumph Dolomites came in 1975, 76, and ADR 27A was introduced in July 1976, and the Dolomite Sprint engine didn't comply to 27A. And so they had to make sure all the compliance plates were fitted up to June 1976, even though the cars continued to be sold into 1977.
I was actually going to suggest we give Mike a break, and that if you've got any further questions, unless they're very, very brief, we can have a conversation with Mike over coffee.
Sure.
Sorry, last one.
The Dolomite Sprints that we saw in Australia,
guys know all that one mustard colour?
Yes, mimosa.
Mimosa yellow.
Mimosa.
Yes, mimosa.
Yep.
I had a black one. Was there ever a black one introduced, or was that being sprayed?
It would have been sprayed. They were all mimosa. That was the only stock we could get in a hurry, because everything was done in a big hurry. When the factory shut down in 1975, we needed something to sell, and we could get sprints, but you could have any colour you like as long as it was yellow. And so we just took a whole bunch of yellow Dolomite sprints. That was the only reason we got mimosa. Do they?
Yeah.
I've seen different coloured ones and they all look good.
So let me thank Mike again for not only coming and speaking this evening, but for speaking for so long and taking so many questions. Thank you for your engagement. To have somebody here who loves TR7s as much as a lot of people in this room do.
Some people know more about it than I do.
Yes, indeed. Can I hand over to Roger to close the proceedings?
I don't need that really. Most of you know my voice and can hear me. And before you disappear, Mike,
Yes.
I've just got a little offering from us.